All right, we are continuing with our session, okay? Second session on foreign direct investment, okay? And our next presenter is Chari, and he will talk about FDI and cross-border acquisition activities in emerging market economies, emerging markets, Turkey as a case of study. Thank you.
Kalimeras. So, Mr. Chairman and dear participants, I'd like to say hi to everyone. I'd like to present my study regarding to the effects of FDI and cross-border acquisition activities on developing markets, Turkey as the case study. It can also be considered as the success of foreign direct investment in Turkey. So I'd like to start with a brief introduction. You heard similar issues like in the session before. A colleague of us was telling about it. I think he's not here right now. Okay. So Turkey has a population over 70 million people, and like 61% of it is under the age of 34. It has a huge domestic market and one of the largest emerging markets worldwide. It was 15th on the last tables of Int'l, I believe. And it has a large and dynamic market with a relatively high and quality labor force. It has economic advantages and good location with easy access to regional markets, as you can also see them on the pictures below. Okay, so it is an advantageous and attractive country, as I mentioned, but despite these advantages, we say that it has received less than expected amount of FDI inflows up to now. So looking at the FDI chronology of the country is going to give us a better understanding of what's happening. We see that after year 2004, the level of FDI started to increase, and as we see, coming to year 2008, it's almost on a level of like 18.2 billion US dollars. We will, on the next slide, we are going to compare. Okay. On the next slide, we are going to compare the country with its neighbors. No, not the next slide, on the other one. Now on this complicated table, you are going to find Turkey on the red labels, and we see the performance better here. Like, if you look at the growth rates on year 2004 and 5, we see that it's like more than 240%, which is quite high. And then on year 2005 and 6, it's also over 100%. I say that the country is performing really well. But of course, coming to year 2008, we see that the performance is slowing down. Okay, now we compare the country with its neighbors. Here, you may see also Greece. It's just below Turkey. We see that on 1990s and between to year 2000, almost Turkey had the same FDI level with Greece. Turkey's was like 791 and Greece had 916. But coming to year 2008, show us that Greece is at a level of 5,000 millions of dollars and Turkey is around billions, and Turkey is around 18. So I think that, like after year 2000, it shows that like Turkey is doing better compared to Greece, and also compared to other developing countries, we see that the growth rate of Turkey is higher than the others. On this table, on this graphic, we see the FDI on world and the trends. The trend is also similar to the Turkish FDI. If you see that the year 2005 and 6, 7 periods, it's peaking and going down starting from year 2008. Okay, so in year 2008, developed countries accounted about 81% of the world FDI inflows, and for Turkey, EU accounts 67% of the capital companies operating in Turkey, and main investing ones include Germany, UK, Netherlands, and USA. And on the top 10 investing countries, we see that USA on the first place, France second, and Germany on the third. Pharmaceuticals comprise a global industry, and in this study was chosen due to its strong level of globalization. So it's going to be my research subject and, let's say, market. So I'm going to give a brief introduction about the pharmaceutical industry of Turkey. After 1984, the investments in the industry increased. And in terms of consumption, the industry grew at a rate of 10.2%. In year 2002, there were 134 entities and only 2 publicly owned. In year 2005, there were 203 firms operating. Coming to year 2006, there were 300 entities, 52 foreign-owned, and 11 with manufacturing facilities. In year 2009, according to the most recent data, the industry generated a revenue of $11.5 billion, and Turkey ranks as the 16th largest pharmaceutical manufacturer worldwide. Some other details about the industry. It is 99% dependent on foreign markets in terms of raw material production, and it is one of the few industrial sectors in which the government has strict control over prices. Here you may see the companies operating in the market. There are many known ones, and multinationals with manufacturing facilities are Baxter, Bayer, Glaxo, Novartis, Pfizer, and Sanofi. On this pie chart, you may see the market shares of these companies in the market, and here we see that as a result of the concentration in the sector, the top 10 producers account about 50% of the market share, and top 20 contribute about 70%. Here, for me, the most crucial data is that there are only 2 local companies in the top 10. So we come to the purpose of the study after this background. The first one was to examine the FDI level in Turkey, and the second was to investigate the nature of FDI inflows into the market by examining the acquisition deals between years 2001 and 2009. Third, to investigate the origin of investors and deal value of M&As between 2001 and 2009 in the pharmaceutical industry of Turkey and check whether these investments are steady. Fourth, to investigate the source of countries for FDI inflows to Turkey between years 2004 and 2008 that have involved in a cross-border M&A activity that is above $10 million. I'm checking the years between 2004 and 2008 because we know that between these years, FDI level of the country peaked. So we come to the data collection and methodology. The data collection was made through primary and secondary resources, and qualitative data were collected through interviews between years 2006 and 2009. The interviews were made with 25 respondents coming from 15 different companies. The data analyses are made according to the categorization of investors, merger and acquisition deals between years 2002 and 2009, and the deal value and year categorizations. So for the first purpose, we have this slide. Here we see the ranking of the country on the right-hand side. We see that the ranking varies between years, and coming to year 2008, the country stays in the 20th position. Of course, it had a better performance, like in year 2006, it was on the 17th position. It's still doing well. So, like as a summary of this FDI, we can say a level of $20 billion in year 2006 and 2007 are seen, but it dropped in line with the global decline to $18 billion in year 2008. Here we can say that there was an 18% decrease, and it is 20th in the among top countries attracting FDI, and it's in the 9th place among developing economies. So as we see in year 2009, the level decreases, but the data is up to only to the 3rd quarter. So the M&A activity also hit brakes in year 2009, and only the privatizations made up 31% of the deal volume. This was because of the effect of global financial crisis, and the M&A activity shrunk into its lowest level since year 2004. For our second purpose, now we are checking what's happening in the industry. Here we see some of the merger and acquisition deals plus some partnership deals. The number of partnerships, joint ventures, and M&As in the industry increases every year. In year 2006, 14 out of top 20 companies have become in foreign investment. So we see a multinational dominance in the market, and but we also see some successful Turkish companies which are showing growth. I'm going to the next slide here. Now we are categorizing what's happening in the market, like in terms of deal values. But of course, this is according to my sample. I think the sample covers like all the mergers above $5 million. So here we see that the majority of the deal values were occurring between 50 to 100 million US dollars between years 2001 and 9, and the majority of them occurred in year 2006. If we check the country of investors, we see that USA is in the first place, and if we again break down into categories like European Union, USA, and the rest, we see that the EU has the most investment. As the third aim, we are looking for the years between 2004 and 8, where, as I said, the FDI level was increasing. Here on the left-hand side, we see the source countries of FDI inflows to Turkey, and on the red labels, we also, you can see that it's intersecting with the source countries for M&A deals to the pharmaceutical industry, about 10 million US dollars. So here what I am trying to mention is that France, UK, USA, and Netherlands came to the market with FDI inflows between years 2004 and 8, and they also exist in the pharmaceutical industry with investments about 10 million US dollars. And you can find more detailed explanations on the below tables. Again, if we categorize these mergers and acquisitions, we see that between year 2004 and 8, the majority of the deals occurred between 10 to 50 million US dollars. And again, the majority occurred in year 2006. So, results. The research sample shows that the majority of the M&A deals has been successful. Only one of the companies were sold to another multinational, and this was due to a global merger and acquisition deal. It didn't occur in the market, it was a global purchase. 11 of the 12 of the marriages still continue, and these marriages were over 5 million US dollars. Some of the source countries for FDI inflows to Turkey between years 2004 and 8 have also involved in M&A activities that are about 10 million US dollars, and these are USA, UK, Netherlands, and France. The analyses indicate that the foreign companies should not hesitate to invest in Turkey. Conclusions. If globalization is inevitable, then FDI is also unstoppable in an open economy. FDI's inflows to Turkey reached to a level of 20 billion US dollars in years 2006 and 7. Given the market structure and current patterns, trade between Turkey and the rest of the world has a broad market space to develop. For the pharmaceutical market, the growth trend is expected to continue, and like in many of the journals I saw, it says that it's more promising than Russia or any other European country. The market is ranked 12th among the top 15 pharmaceutical markets, and the majority of the respondents say that the Turkish market is not yet large enough. FDI plays a major role in this industry, and it seems like for sure it's going to receive more investments. Foreign companies that involved in M&A deals over 5 million in the industry in Turkey are staying in the market. That's what our cases showed us. And the fifth one, the industry has received important amounts of FDI and still tries to attract FDI. Here the critical question is whether the industry actually needs this capital, while the difference between multinationals and locals are increasing every day as a result of FDIs. FDI policies of developing countries play a vital role for host countries as they manage FDI inflows, and here we say that pharmaceutical industry is a privileged industry, and a country must be careful about maintaining its local producers. And the last one, it's the question highlighted, whether global convergence is an uncontrollable evolutionary development to which governments must comply. Efarostopoli.
Thank you very much. Our next presenter is Christina Sakali. What kind of theory for FDI in Bulgaria? Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Christina Sakali, and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Macedonia. My presentation is dealing with the theory of FDI determinants in the case of Bulgaria. I will say just a few things about the theory of FDI determinants, and then I will proceed to the case of Bulgaria. The first theories of FDI determinants emerged in the 1960s in a very different investment environment and were driven by the predominance of the American multinationals in outward FDI. As a consequence, they were preoccupied by the multinational corporation and they were mainly microeconomic. Later, as the number of countries engaging in FDI increased, the theory moved along and incorporated macroeconomic and dynamic aspects of the investors' motivations. In the 1990s, the fall of the Soviet Union and the opening up of Central and Eastern European countries has created a favorable area for the establishment of FDI. As a response to these developments, a significant part of empirical research has been directed towards studying FDI determinants and motivations in that area. The objective of the presentation is to explore the kind of FDI theory that would apply to the case of Bulgaria, following, first, the FDI trends and patterns in Bulgaria from the beginning of transition until today, and second, the empirical research, the limited empirical research on FDI determinants that has been conducted in Bulgaria. So now we will proceed to the FDI trends and patterns in Bulgaria during transition. The Bulgarian transition to a market economy has gone through 4 different phases of reforms and consequently of FDI patterns. The first phase lasted from the implementation of the Big Bang in 1991 until 1996, and it was highly turbulent. During the second phase, 1997 to 2004, the country was able to finally stabilize its economy and create the institutional reforms that would enable it to enter the EU, the European Union. The third period, 2005-2007, was marked by EU accession and further transformation of the country. Finally, the fourth period, which started in 2008 and continues until today, it was marked by the global economic crisis and economic recession, as well as the government's efforts to ensure Bulgaria's membership in the Economic and Monetary Union, EMU, as early as possible. In this graph, you can see the FDI trends during transition. You can see how low FDI inflows were in the beginning, at the beginning of the transition, and how it rose later when the country entered the EU, and then how it started to fall again when the global economic crisis struck. The first period of transition was characterized by extreme economic and political instability. The implementation of Big Bang therapy or shock therapy in 1991 liberalized 90% of the prices. Liberalization of prices in combination with a floating exchange rate, which produced subsequent devaluations of the currency, resulted in hyperinflation, which was estimated at 339% for 1991 as a whole. At the same time, Bulgaria's indecisive and at times highly restrictive credit policy posed a serious obstacle to both domestic and foreign investment and delayed the restructuring of the economy. Investor interest in Bulgaria has remained low in the first years of transition. This indicates, of course, the importance of a stable economic and political environment, as well as the successful restructuring of the economy in attracting foreign investors. The second period was perhaps the most important in the country's transition path. It brought political and macroeconomic stabilization, which was largely due to the introduction of the currency board system and a stable exchange rate. Most importantly, the preparation for EU accession brought about necessary institutional reforms and enterprise restructuring. Negative aspects were the impact of reforms in the living standards, wages were extremely low, and the continued inability of governments to address the serious problems of corruption and organized crime. As a result of Bulgaria's increasing transformation into a market economy, FDI in the country began to increase significantly since 1997. Over the period 1996 to 2001, FDI was rising at an annual growth of 45%, and in 2000, FDI stock was at 26% of GDP compared to only 3.4% of GDP in 1995. And here you can see some data from the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development regarding the percentage of FDI stock as a percentage of GDP in transition countries. You can see the difference between 1995 and 2000. The third period in Bulgaria's transition was marked by European integration. In April 2005, the country signed the EU accession treaty. However, the problems of corruption and organized crime had not been addressed satisfactorily. So the country finally took an important legislative step and adopted the National Strategy for Good Governance, Prevention and Counteraction of Corruption 2006-2008, which aimed at particularly attacking political corruption in the country. As a result of Bulgaria's Europeanization, FDI rose consistently in the years before the country was hit by the global economic crisis. In 2006, FDI almost doubled from 3,000 to 6,000 million euros following the signing of the accession treaty. And then in 2007, FDI rose again, mounting to almost 8,500 million euros. The fourth period started in 2008 and was marked by the detrimental effects of the global financial and economic crisis. According to the IMF's World Economic Outlook, Bulgarian real GDP fell by 5% in 2009 and is expected to remain stagnant in 2010. As a consequence, in 2008, FDI inflows in Bulgaria decreased for the first time after 2001 to just over 6,000 million euros. In 2009, the fall in FDI inflows was even bigger, with FDI inflows falling to half the level of 2008. As a result, FDI inflows decreased by more than 60% in the period between 2007 and 2009. It seems that the efforts by Bulgarian governments to maintain the currency board regime and macroeconomic stability in order to secure an early EMU membership have been hampered by the global economic crisis and the recession. As a result, FDI inflows have been negatively affected as well. I am now going to present an overview of the very few empirical studies on FDI determinants that have been conducted in Bulgaria, in an attempt to draw out the main motivations that have driven FDI in Bulgaria during its transition to a market economy. Bulgaria is a case which is neglected by the literature on FDI determinants, so we have very few empirical research concerning FDI determinants in this country. An early study by Gleister and Atanasova, which was published in 2001, was based on in-depth interviews with senior expatriate managers of 9 large and well-known international firms which had established FDI ventures in Bulgaria. For most of these firms, the decision to invest in Bulgaria was made in the context of their international expansion strategy and their aspiration to establish a strong presence in the area earlier than their competitors. Apart from a couple of firms which were driven by raw material endowments, such as the oil and gas reserves of the Black Sea, all the other firms in the sample reported no country-specific factors driving their investment decision in Bulgaria. The investment decision was further encouraged by own company factors, such as the firm size, financial resources, international experience, and managerial or technological know-how. These firm-specific assets would allow firms to deal with a number of challenges in operating an FDI venture in Bulgaria. These challenges were reported by the sample firms as the following: market weaknesses, which means low levels of purchasing power, bureaucracy, dealing with official corruption, finding reliable local suppliers, and the long learning curves of local employees of an otherwise well-educated and qualified workforce. The studies by Bigenis and Totev also reported on a number of significant incentives to investment based on their surveys. According to Bigenis, the main incentives for FDI in Bulgaria were in order of significance: the market size, mentioned by 94% of the sample, low labor cost of unskilled workers, mentioned by 67%, geographical proximity, mentioned by 58%, globalization and international competitive pressures, mentioned by 45%, prospects for market growth, by 44%, the link and access to neighboring countries near Bulgaria, mentioned by 42%, and the lack of local competition, mentioned by 41% of the sample. These results generally support the findings by Gleisi and Atanasova regarding the strategic nature of investment decisions in Bulgaria. Both studies confirm the existence of strategic reasons, such as to face the challenges of global competition and establish access to the wider region. The prospects for European Union accession were, of course, considered significant in this respect. Totev's research was conducted and published later than the studies by Gleisi and Atanasova and Bigenis. His findings were therefore affected by Bulgaria's progress in transition reforms and restoration of macroeconomic stability. This is evident in the factors that were outlined by foreign firms as being the main advantages of investing in Bulgaria. The existence of cheap labor of good quality, which makes production more competitive, the comparatively liberal trade regime and wide access to external markets, access to large markets when using Bulgarian global trade agreements, the increasing economic and business culture in the country, economic stability after pegging the local currency to the euro, and finally, long-lasting economic relations with Bulgaria were also reported by certain firms. So now we can draw some conclusions regarding FDI theory in the case of Bulgaria. It seems that at the beginning of the transition, there were no particular location advantages specific to Bulgaria. On the contrary, it could be said that Bulgaria was characterized by significant location challenges. As a result of these challenges or barriers to investment, FDI remained very low at the beginning of the transition. The limited FDI that came into the country in the 1990s was mainly motivated by firms' global expansion strategies and the competitive pressures among global leading firms. Moreover, they were motivated by prospects for future market and business growth and had therefore long-term perspectives for their business. However, as the transition reforms continued and the country was gradually being transformed into a market economy, location challenges were starting to turn into location advantages, such as integration with Western organizations, access to neighboring countries and large markets, growth and rise of GDP per capita, therefore increasing market potential, macroeconomic stability, political stability and improvements in the legal system, increasing familiarity with the local market, and increasing business culture and more successful business relations with local partners. Of course, the transition process still continues and it is greatly affected by the global economic crisis. The Bulgarian economy could be further benefited by EMU integration, but it seems that the government's efforts to secure early EMU membership are hampered by the global economic crisis and also the Eurozone crisis as well. We can therefore understand that the process concerning investment decisions in Bulgaria has been a distinctly dynamic process, which was affected by different factors at different stages of the transition process. Therefore, we can conclude that The theory of FDI in Bulgaria should be dynamic because transition countries, and especially Bulgaria, have undergone a process of vast transformation during the last 20 years of transition. Location and transition characteristics seem to be particularly important as the whole area became attractive to FDI during transition. However, varying levels of FDI among countries indicate that each country presents a unique set of advantages as well as obstacles to investors, which does not remain fixed but changes over time, along with changes in the levels and types of FDI. Indeed, in the first years of transition, FDI was almost non-existent in the country, as the obstacles to investors seemed to outweigh the opportunities. However, over time, and as the transition reforms progressed, some of the location challenges turned into location advantages that contributed to the attraction of significant amount of FDI, especially in the last few years before the global economic crisis struck. Here are the reference of the presentation, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much to the presenters. Any questions and comments? And just be aware that Christina is a PhD student, okay, and Chagri as well is planning to do a PhD. So all your comments and questions and queries will be very useful for them. And the more critical, the better. Okay.
Vanoglu, thank you for your presentation. It was very nice. I would like to ask you in regard to the pharmaceutical industry. How many of the companies you mentioned, foreign or domestic, have industrial facilities in the country? How many employees do they have, if you have this data? What's the effect on the exports of the country and on the trade balance? And the last small question, I would like your personal opinion about the effect of the political situation in Turkey in regard to FDI in the country. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. In terms of manufacturing facilities that you have asked, the foreign ones are having like 11 manufacturing facilities, and about the locals, I am not really sure, because there are also some small local companies who are manufacturing within the country, so I'm not really aware of the number of it. Your second one was about the number of employees. I'm aware of how many pharmacists exist in Turkey. It's like around 20,000, but I'm not really sure about how many people are working in the industry. For the third one, trade balance, I have those numbers. Like when I was doing the research, I had the numbers, but now I don't really want to mention something wrong, so it's better if we email and I'll tell you more about.
I just want to know if there's a positive contribution, not the exact number. I mean, is it good for Turkey? Does it export any of the medicines of the drugs it produces?
Yeah, of course we export, and also there are some companies who are making production in India and China. They prefer India because like producing in India is cheaper, and they produce in India, they import and they sell they export. It's like, you know, it's coming from India and like it goes to USA and all over the world. So what I say is they prefer and because of the costs, they are not really wanting to produce in the country. I mean, you know, the global world, it's China and India, so that's what they are doing. About your last question of how the government thinks about the FDI, I know that Mr. President is really willing to have FDI, and he has some sentences like, if the FDI is coming, I don't care about which country invests. He says, FDI come. That's his like sentence.
Yorgo?
Yes, I have questions for both presentations. At first for Chagri Pehlivanoglu. Just to better understand the pattern of foreign direct investment in the pharmaceutical industry in Turkey, some questions for more information. Are there any major multinational companies, pharma companies, that are involved in these mergers or FDI inflows in Turkey? That's the first question. The second is if these companies invest a lot, if there is a really important capital investment or transfer, technology transfer, and what is the structure of the capital? Generally, not case by case, but generally it's a majority for the foreign investor, it's a minority, it's half and half, how it works generally. This is for the first presentation. The second, Christina, it's a very interesting topic. You know very well that I'm interested to what you are studying. As you are talking about theories, the theory of foreign direct investment in Bulgaria, maybe you have done it in your work, but it was not very clear in your presentation. Maybe you have interest to combine the 4 periods that you have distinguished with the eventually different patterns of foreign direct investment in Bulgaria during these periods. Well, my knowledge is quite old, but indeed during the first period of instability, let's say, there have been foreign direct investment, very low from a value point of view. A lot of Greeks that have had $5,000 savings, they have invested in Bulgaria during this period, creating little conglomerates in the services sectors. They have disappeared with the financial crisis of the '96, indeed. So, but you have had foreign direct investment with a very special nature, indeed. And afterwards, they have had more, let's say, serious, more industrial projects, and later the privatization. So I feel that maybe we have different patterns in these different periods, and that means that the dynamic theory of that we have to apply to understand the foreign direct investment in Bulgaria means maybe different theories. Maybe, I don't know, but different theories in function to the different periods. We can have a follow the leader model in a case, you can have another model in another case, but maybe it's interesting to investigate this question. Thank you.
Okay, so for the capital investments, I would say that it's like 50 to 50. However, looking at top 20 gives us a better understanding, such as the 14 out of top 20 of the companies are foreigners. So I still insist that the foreigners have the power. But okay, for the investments, I'm going to say 50 to 50. And about the mergers and acquisitions, there was a big local company called Eczacıbaşı. It is a family business owned by a very rich family. And the company was involved in an M&A acquisition activity. I think it was Czech company called Zentiva. They came to the Turkish market and they took over the company. And it also raised many questions in the market and also in the country about, why is this local company is exiting from the industry. There are also some other examples like this, but it was the biggest one.
The studying of FDI trends and patterns in Bulgaria during transition was exactly the topic of the presentation and my interest, and to see how these patterns changed during transition and why they changed. And what I noted was that they changed because different motivations were more important at different stages of transition. And what you mentioned about perhaps different theories applying in the different phases, this is actually very interesting. And yes, and I think I could explore it more. But what I wanted to do is think about FDI theory in Bulgaria and create perhaps a framework about explaining and saying that FDI theory in Bulgaria has been dynamic and it has been affected by diverse factors.
Costa?
There are two missing links in your survey, especially during the first two periods of your paper, the link between FDI and privatization, which is vital for Bulgaria, and secondly, the link between FDI and trade openness, especially just before the accession to the European Union. So I think you should elaborate more on these two links.
I have mentioned these links, and you're right, they were very important in the motivations of investors, but you're right, they could be explored more, and I could elaborate on them. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? That gives me the opportunity to ask questions. One or two each. All right. The title of a paper and the introduction is everything. Okay. And my concern is that, and let's start with Chagri, is that I don't like labels, generally. Okay. And when you say emerging markets, and in the case, Turkey is an emerging market, what does this mean? I mean, and so it's an emerging market now. Before, it wasn't a market. I mean, words are very powerful, and they have a lot of power in them. Okay, and we can get easily confused. So I would like you to elaborate on that. And then, Christina, what kind of a theory for FDI in Bulgaria? Okay. Immediately that says to me that you're trying to identify one theory, okay, based on the time. Now, we know FDI depends on a lot of factors, and from empirical evidence, there's no such one theory that explains everything, okay. So, from that point of view, I mean, can you elaborate to that? What is the goal of the paper? To find one theory at the end, or not?
For the emerging market title, I'm not the only one calling it emerging market. IMF is calling it as an emerging market. Int'l is
that's the easy response. But the thing is that, is it an excuse because others are using it, we should use it as well?
Yes.
Okay. Yes? Yes. Yes. Okay, I'll give you an example. In a conference, I met a fellow Turkish economist, and he said to me, Turkey is a transition economy. Now, again, first of all, I will say that I'm one of those using those terms, but I have criticized that term very much in my papers. I mean, would you agree on that?
I'm getting your concern about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. The thing is that IMF looks at the investment levels in a country, its inflation, and all other indicators, and they are giving some decisions and making some rankings. So, I mean, it's good to hold on some international standards. So, okay, that's why we are applying the same thing. I'm really getting your concern, and I'm also having the same concern. When Turkey becomes a developed market, how are we going to mention it? Is there any way to, assess the data? I mean, what's the difference?
Sorry, we're having a conversation here, but I'll say one last thing. Even if the term is wrong, but it's popular, should we be using it? Now, I'm not saying about that term. Maybe it's correct. Eh?
It is not wrong. You are utterly wrong. It's very simple. This is a typical phrase for an economy like the Turkey one, which I think there is no better one. Proves the opposite. Before you say this, proves the opposite, that this phrase is wrong because first, second, third. Then would be fine.
Okay.
So we can make a research on it.
Eh?
We can conduct a research on it, maybe.
Of course, of course. We can discuss this later as well. Okay. I won't monopolize it.
As I mentioned earlier, I think what I wanted to do was to create a framework in order to explain the FDI trends and patterns in Bulgaria and the motivations, and to show through this framework that the motivations have been different at different stages of the transition. It wasn't to... my objective was not to take one theory from the ones that exist already and apply it to the case of Bulgaria. Just to try and create a framework which applies to the case of an individual country, which is Bulgaria. Is this clear now?
It's clear, but it's not reflected in the topic.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for your comments.
Anything else? We still have some time.
We can go for lunch.
Should we go for lunch? Oh, that's a good excuse, isn't it? Okay, let's thank the presenters. Thank you very much.